Isaiah Grant back with Thinking in Circles. This is going to be lecture 2 of 3 of the Mysteries of Mithras, right? So when all is said and done, we're going to get straight into it. Once again, just to keep you guys on track, we're basically doing this as a elaboration on an older lecture topic that I did. And this lecture topic has been so amazing to me, and the depths that it holds and the way that it actually is almost like a lens that you can look at more contemporary religions, per se, Christianity, through. And basically studying Mithraism will take you through looking into Zoroastrianism as well, which is a very rich religion that definitely had an impact on Christianity in the way that they their doctrine of good and evil, the way that they look at good and evil, even their idea of what the Holy Spirit was, that they call spenta meniu, or the idea of the Dana, which we might talk about a little bit here in this portion of the lecture, if not the third portion of the lecture. And just something really interesting that I've come to see in this, the whole DNA, you could say, of Mithraism. It's linked with the sun. It's linked with the solar libido. There is something that links not just the solar libido to time, but that links also time with the aspect of the Holy Spirit and the movement of time, which with something such as that. And I'm really finding these underpinnings within this myth that they're very, very, very amazing and rich for one that wants to understand more about the psyche, though. And there's a big bombshell that hit for me during these studies is finding out about Germanic thought on the sexuality of the sun and the moon, and when you get into the idea, if we think for ourselves, based upon the ideologies that have been given out, that the moon is the unconscious and the sun is the conscious mind, right? We find something that is pretty amazing when we see how the idea of the sun links directly actually to Saturn. The sun was looked at in Germanic, some Germanic tribes, as feminine, and the moon was looked at as something masculine. They looked at the moon most possibly then as the conscious ego and the sun as the unconscious, But there was always the real sun that stood behind the visions of the sun, and this was the black sun. This was Saturn, So these figures that we're going to talk about in this next portion of the lecture are directly linked to Saturn. When we're talking about Aion, we're talking about Zorvan, we're talking about Cronus, where we're not just talking about mythological deities, but we're also talking about formulas of time and space in the universe. And also there's a linkage between time and space with energy. So we also have its linkage with the libido directly implied in just its existence, period. So we're going to get onto it now. Okay. So this is going to be a real quick side note to enter into the lecture and also allow you with a different way of looking at the Tauroctony of Mithras. So on a quick side note, before re-entering our topic, I'd quickly like us to take a look at the Tauroctony imagery once more. I'm going to put that up on the screen before we go into the idea of the syncretized deities of endless time, which correspond to the fifth principle, or the fifth picture in the sequence of images we are currently utilizing to explain the myth of Mithras, and also create or expose a system of shadow work inherently implied within the myth posts of the Tauroctony, right? The imagery of the Tauroctony should be seen through the lens of astrological exaltations. So I'm going to give you some ideas of what these could be, right? And it's shown right there in the imagery, right? So we have Aries is exalted in sun, right? That mirrors Mithras being raised or exalted by Sol or Helios, right? Sharing a banquet or reaching for the nimbus of solar Helios. It's the same thing, Aries, the warrior, the hero, being exalted in the sign or the planet of the moon. I mean, the sun, rather. And the fact that Aries is exalted in the sun, we see this in his exaltation and his being made equal with solar Helios, okay? So, Taurus is exalted in moon. This mirrors Goesharvan being purified in the moon. The seeds of this divine bull were being purified in the moon after being killed by Ahriman, which is the Zoroastrian principle of evil, okay? And we may talk more about those things, because Zorvan is actually the same iconography and imagery that they give to Zorvan, they give to Ahriman also, and also to Aion, so that I find interesting. But we see that the bull has a direct link with the moon here in this Zoroastrian myth that actually links parallel with Mithra's killing of the bull. So Gemini is exalted in Leo. I mean, not Leo. That looks so much like Leo, but the rising node, the dragon's head upright, right? Caudes and Catapades with their linkage to Mithras, and as twin deities linking back to the self, they both represent demarcations in time, equinoxes, and seasons of spring and winter. One is an upward torchbearer and downward torchbearer is the other, respectively. And the latter season of winter is like the solar devouring Ketu. And the opposite of Ketu is Rahu, which rules over Sagittarius, if I'm correct and not mistaken here. But this is Gemini's planet of exaltation. Spring is the evidence of victory, emergence from the other side of Ketu, which is the head portion that tries to devour the sun. And the sun, because it has no body, it was cut in half by another deity, cut this being in half, right? And when it was cut in half, when it devours the sun, it comes out on the other side, basically, But while the sun is afflicted, or while a sign is afflicted by Ketu or Rahu, there's some problems that come to that individual, but they're due to emerge on the other side. That's my understanding that I've been given of that. But anyways, let's continue forward. So we're going to talk about Zorvanism and the figure of Aion or Kronos. And also, when we get into this, right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put up a cluster map, and it's called the Aion cluster that Edward F. Edinger put together. And this cluster map is going to show you a portion on there that says inner partner, right? The inner partner has much to do with the Zoroastrian idea of the Dhyana, okay? And that this links to the Saturnian Aeon, as I said earlier when I prefaced this lecture, right? That Aeon is a Saturnian deity, right? Time, eternity, age, epoch, lifespan, those are Saturnian ideas, and that those Saturnian ideas, in the way that they're attached to things, they're very logoic if you think about it, because they bring to order a specific chaos, you could say, that would persist without the order. Like if there was a bunch of people without specific fate placed on a time for their life, yeah, of course, going through life, they can't see it, but it's there. There's inclinations, there's ways that they're drawn, and the Dhyana, which is actually completely cognate with the idea of the anima, It really anima and animus. You have to throw animus in there because that's the male representation, but due to the fact that it's possibly that the religion was really one-sided in favoring masculinity, they gave that the Diana was a beautiful female, a beautiful woman. You know what I'm saying? But nevertheless, though, we have the idea of this woman within a masculine individual, within a masculine person, within a male, that there is a contrasexual aspect that's called the anima, and the anima and the Diana actually link together perfectly. The idea of the daemon, this driving force that causes you to want to do certain things, and then when you go against it, for some reason you're punished, but it's because you have this oversight, this personification that comes from this archetypal level of Aion, okay? That comes from maybe a level that goes before the archetypes as well, though, too. I'm still trying to struggle with how far back to place it. How far back to place time, if you will, the beginning of time. Because if you think about time, in order for time to exist, there has to be an observer. Otherwise, there's no time. There's no conscious logging of time, if you will. It's just an empty entity that has to, in some way, shape, fashion, or form, manufacture an observer, which is, if you think about the Big Bang, if you're into Darwinism, or if you think about even the Kabbalistic Big Bang, Kether coming out of Ayin Soph, as Ayin Soph Aor, you know what I mean? These ideas that you're going to find within this idea, of Aion, is really catchy. It's really catchy. But the Diana, I would like you to look at as also too the inner partner that you'll see here, right? And the inner partner, the Diana, right? A concept representing insight, revelation, conscience, and also religion. It is also considered to be a divinity, ranked as a Zoroastrian Yazada. See the Indo-European root asterisk DA, which means to divide, and also from whence the term, the Greek daemon, which means divinity, derives. Okay, so this idea of Aion, time, eternity, everything has an Aion, everything has a time that's attached to it. You know what I mean? It's not just the time of all things, which it is, but it's time, actually, time and destiny and fate linked to specific things. But we're gonna get into some readings from Edward F. Edinger that are gonna describe this more, and I'm gonna keep this Aion cluster up on the board for you, or up on the up on the screen for you. That way you can follow along and maybe see a little bit more about what's going to be talked about further here. Okay. So the title Aion refers to a very complex symbolic image which has evolved throughout the centuries and has a rich set of meanings. All words are psychic organisms. Each has at its core some fundamental experience, and there will be an image of that experience embedded in the etymology of the word. As one traces the way its usage has evolved, a whole organism unfolds. The word Aion is a particularly rich example. Ancient Greek had 3 words for time: chronos, kairos, and aeon. Chronos referred to quantitative linear time. It would be the scientific term. Kairos referred to the special moment, the special content of a particular time. It would be the right moment, the time of fulfillment. For instance, Christ saying, "My time, Kairos, has not yet come." The third term aeon is more diffuse and ambiguous, but has come to mean a very long period of time, something like an age or even eternity or forever. The word aeon is linked to other words which should be mentioned also. Aeonos meaning without beginning or end, eternal or forever, and eidos meaning eternal. Both words have their root term in the word aeon. And keep in mind, because it's probably not, it might be said here, it might not be said, but aeon also is augmented when it is linked to an object. Like the aeon of this pen might be a little bit after I get done using it and the ink is out of it, and then it gets tossed into a trash can and into a trash vehicle and taken to some recycling plant somewhere, or burned or incinerated, and then that's the aeon of this pen. But after this pen has run its aeon out, if they're recycling, somehow, some way, the energy that this pen has crystallized in this format or form, if you will, it will be bounded back over, because there's continuity of energy, if you will. You know, energy always finds a way to ground itself back out again. You know, it doesn't go somewhere and it just disappears. It's always part of that one whole. So let us continue here, all right? The use of the word aeon goes back to Homer, where the term aeon is often used as parallel to psyche, to soul, or to life. In Hesiod, it denotes lifespan. In Aeschylus, it refers to a generation, so that it can mean the time one has already lived or will live. It can relate to past as well as to future, and as the philosophers picked it up, it came to refer to the far future and to eternity. So if you see, there's the past, there's the present, there's the future that this is talking about. And that's why we also spoke of Janus in the last lecture, because Janus is the god of the doorways, of beginnings, of the present, and then also, you know, the future, what you're going towards. So when all is said and done, that's something that's much needed. But this last paragraph actually did speak about what I just said earlier about aeon referring to something for the time and the duration that it's going to be you know, living out for its fate, for its destiny, for the time allotted to it. So let's see. In Homer's Iliad, in speaking of the death of a warrior, Hera says to Zeus, when his psyche and aeon have left him, then send death to bear him away. Here, the term means lifespan, a separate reality, a kind of inner partner that is practically identical to the soul. In another place, Homer identifies aeon with an inner water which is wasted away in tears. For instance, when Odysseus is weeping for his return home, Homer says his eyes were never dry of tears, and his sweet aeon was ebbing away, as he longed mournfully for his return. Here is the thought that aeon is a kind of inner water, and there's only a limited quantity of it. When it is all used up, one dies. That's something to think about in the line of what people, there's a school of thought on what gnosis is and how it deals very intrinsically with the retention of bodily fluids and with the transmutation of bodily fluids, you know, bringing them from the lower chakric centers all the way up to the higher chakric centers, you know, and in doing so receiving enlightenment, you know. So in Aeschylus, Agamemnon, in Aeschylus's tongue twister, Agamemnon, aeon means quite explicitly a life partner. He is the source of the poet's inspiration. The chorus of the elders exclaims, the aeon that has grown with me inspireth of the gods, breatheth upon me persuasion, the strength of song. The author is saying that my inner aeon inspired me to be a poet and sing my song. In another glance in Aeschylus, the word means a generation. Old is the tall old is the tale of sin I tell, but swift in retribution. To the third aeon it abides. It means to the third generation, the guilt is passed on from one generation to another. In Timaeus, Plato says about the creation of the universe, now the nature of the ideal being was everlasting, but to bestow this attribute in its fullness upon a creature was impossible. Wherefore he, the demiurge, resolved to have a moving image of Aion, and this image we call Chronos. In other words, he resolved to have a moving image of eternity, and this image we call time, or Aion, or Zurvan, or Chronos. Plotinus finally refined this idea that time is the moving image of eternity in this passage. In eternity, Aion is life at rest, unchanging and identical and already unbounded, and time must exist in an image of eternity. Then we must say that there is an other lower life corresponding to higher life. The lower life has instead of a unity, without distance or separation, a unity by continuity, and instead of a complete unbounded whole, a continuous unbounded succession, and instead of a whole altogether, a whole which is and always will be going to come into being part by part. It is a psychologically profound notion that eternity or aeon is an image of totality outside of time, whereas time is an image of the same totality spread out in a temporal sequence. This corresponds exactly to Jung's remark in Mysterium Conjunctionis. The one after another is a bearable prelude to the deeper knowledge of the side by side. Aion was thought of as an inner water, and was also thought that after the death of the individual, the inner water was left as a snake. The snake was imagined as the soul of the departed one, inhabiting the tomb perhaps. All of these connections are included in Figure 1, a cluster diagram showing the major references to Aion. I've had that up here for quite a while for you guys, and we'll keep it up here, but this is heavy in when you think that the demiurge made, and this kind of answers my question from the standpoint of one person's view, that the demiurge, which is known in some pantheons as Yaldabaoth, right? The demiurge, and then Islamists they look at it and will say that Aion is the demiurge. There's conflicting viewpoints. And I even find out how far back to place time. That's like trying to think of the Kabbalistic zero. That's trying to figure out the depths of the number one. You need something else by which to compare in time, and that's what this bit of literature is talking about, the comparison of time, to be able to see how time is progressing and going. You need to be able to make notches into time, but there was a time where that didn't even exist, because as you go beyond your notions, any human notions of what time is or where time originated, you go back to a place where there's just darkness, absence of sound, absence of light, absence of sensation, absence of all things. You know what I mean? And the truth is, that's the root of where all things came. The idea of the zero, the idea of emptiness, is the reason why all things are here, and the reason for desire, if you will. So there's so much that you get out of pondering this information. But nevertheless, let us continue forward, because I'll get on a sidebar that will cost us more time here, right? This psychic organism called Aion has also appeared in many biblical passages. The Old Testament was translated into Greek in the 3rd century BC, and the word Aion shows up there. Yahweh says to Abraham in Canaan, all the land which thou seest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed for an Aion. Genesis 13:15. The usual translation is forever. Yahweh says to Moses concerning the celebration of the Passover, you must keep these rules as an ordinance for an aeon for you and your children. For all time is the way it is translated into English, but as you can see, it does not mean exactly for all time. This is what it means to late Western man, but not quite what it meant at the beginning. And once again, let's remember that the demiurge made an image of time, made an image of what that is, you see? And we can trace it up to the stars, to the zodiac symbols, because that's what were used by older civilizations in order to understand time. Even in the Bible, it's noted that the stars were used for seasons and times to understand those things. So it's one of those things that we really have to think about what this image was. And if you think about it, we have pictures of Aion, of Kronos, with the astrological symbols on its body, as if it is this image that's being spoken about, and which is helpful, like I'm not going to devolve personally into worship of an entity, but the symbolic attributes help you also to crack the code on what's being shown here, because it's one of the most important aspects of the psyche to understand Saturn. I really believe, to understand the fact that it's the last of the mysteries. Saturn also, the fact that in the fact that it's cognate with the idea of death, with the idea of transformation, with the idea of wheat, with the idea of the wheat being a great mystery. That's the child of the Heros Gamos once again. With the fact that it's something that's such a high and key symbolic aspect. Time, Saturn is something that we want to get an understanding of, because it's that which we will have to give all of our faculties, all of our enjoyment, all things to, if we are to achieve some level of enlightenment. And it's linked directly to the idea of sacrifice within the myth of Mithras. Okay, because why? Saturn hands Mithras the knife and says, hey, go over there and put that work in. So it's something to think about, okay? Let us continue here. There are some interesting uses of the word in the New Testament. For example, whoever shall speak against the Holy Spirit shall not be forgiven him neither in this aeon nor in the aeon to come. This is usually translated in this age or the next age. Again, as therefore the tares are gathered and burned with the fire, so shall it be in the end of this aeon. That's Matthew 13:40. From Hebrews 11:3. Through faith we understand that the aeons have been framed by the word of God, translated worlds. The Lord's Prayer ends, for thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory to the aeons. Matthew 6:13. To shift to another text, the inscription in Greek on Jung's Bollingen stone begins as usually translated into English. Time is a child playing like a child, playing a board game, the kingdom of the child. As a translation into German, Jung suggests that the word Zeit, which in English is time, but the Greek word which starts that inscription on the stone is the word Aion. So it reads, Aion is a child playing a board game. Time is not exactly right. It would probably be better to say the age, the Aion, is a child playing a board game. In late syncretism, Aion became the name of the deity, as shown in the frontispiece of Jung's Aion and above page 10. This is the so-called Mithraic god Aion, whom Franz Kuman describes in these words. And Franz Kuman has a book that I recommended, and this book I'm pretty sure is where this came from that I'm about to read here. At the pinnacle of the divine hierarchy in Mithraic mythology, in Mithraic theology, was boundless time. So at the pinnacle of the divine hierarchy in Mithraic theology was boundless time. Sometimes they would call it Aion. He was represented in the likeness of a human monster with the head of a lion and his body enveloped by a serpent. The multiplicity of attributes with which his statues are loaded is in keeping with the kaleidoscopic nature of his character. He bears the scepter and the bolts of divine sovereignty, and holds in each hand a key as the monarch of the heavens, whose portal he opens. His wings are symbolic of the rapidity of his flight. The reptile whose sinuous folds enwrap him typifies the tortuous course of the sun on the ecliptic. The signs of the zodiac engraved on his body and the emblems of the seasons that accompany them are meant to represent the celestial and terrestrial phenomenon that signalize the eternal flight of the years. He creates and destroys all things. He is the Lord and Master of the four elements. Sometimes he is identified with destiny. So that's pretty deep if you think about it. And in a way, too, that kind of puts him in the same league with the Hindu Shiva, you know, as a destroyer, but a destroyer so that all things can be recreated from his office, you see. So let us continue here. So continuing about destiny. Destiny would be a word for lifespan here, another term that belongs in the same symbolic cluster. So Aion also means destiny. Including all these meanings, Aion becomes the total deity. The idea of Aion is picked up in Gnosis, in which the initial boundless deity emanates from himself a series of 30 aeons. The Gnostic emanation of the aeons is another amplification or elaboration of this rich, complex psychic organism that Jung writes about. Hans Jonas describes the role of the term aeon in Gnosticism. In invisible and nameless heights, there was a perfect aeon pre-existent. His name is For Beginning, For Father, and Abyss. This is the original primordial deity named Aion. No thing can comprehend him. Through immeasurable eternities, he remained in profoundest repose. With him was thought, also called grace and silence. And once this abyss took thought to project out of himself the beginning of all things, and he sank this project like a seed into the womb of the silence that was with him, and she conceived and brought forth the mind, nous, male, right, who is like and equal to his begetter, and alone comprehends the greatness of the Father. He is also the only begotten, Father and beginning of all beings. Together with him, truth, aletheia, female, was produced, and this is the first tetrad, abyss and silence, then mind and truth. This first tetrad is a pair of two syzygies. Syzygy means pair. Further, and we're going to get into the word syzygy a little bit later here in this documentation, because Zorvan emanates the principles of good and evil, Ormazd and Angria Manu, respectively. So that is a syzygy. That is a pair. So we need to talk about that, okay? Furthermore, aeons were generated out of this second pair. From them came forth man and church, which is again a male-female pair, and word and life. Then this gave a total of 4 syzygies, and that was called the Ogdoad, the first 8. These aeons produced to the glory of the Father, wish to glorify the Father by their own creations, and produce further emanations from word and life issued 10 additional aeons from man and church, 12, so that out of 8 and 10 and 12 is constituted 30 aeons in 50 pairs, and that totality was called the pleroma. This basic image was something quite fundamental to Jung. He used some of this terminology, such as the word pleroma. The second chapter of Aion is called the Syzygy. One is not apt to know what that means unless one is familiar with the grand Gnostic conception of the origin of things. Okay, so let's continue forward here. Okay. Okay, so this is talking about the Mithraic god Aion, a human figured wing with a lion's head encircled by a great serpent. This image also comes up in Jung's experience of confrontation with the unconscious. It is not in memories, dreams, reflections, but is to be found in the 1925 seminar account, which memories reproduces only partially. Jung describes his encounter with Elijah and Salome and his descent into the unconscious. He met Salome and Elijah, and there was a serpent with them. Then a most disagreeable thing happened. This is the recounting of it. Salome became very interested in me, and she assumed that I could cure her blindness. She began to worship me. I said, "Why do you worship me?" She replied, "You are Christ." In spite of my objection, she maintained this. I said, "This is madness," and became filled with skeptical resistance. Then I saw the snake approach me. She came close and began to encircle me and press me in her coils. The coils reached up to my heart. I realized and I struggled that I had assumed the attitude of the crucifixion. So he was like this, like with his arms out, right? Is what he's saying. In the agony and the struggle, I sweated so profusely that water flowed down on all sides of me. Then Salome rose, and she could see. While the snake was pressing me, I felt that my face had taken on the face of an animal of prey, a lion or tiger. This parallels the image of Aion. Now, what does this mean? I think that one of the things it means is that Jung is the first representative of the new Aion, and it was his experience to go through the initiation of being identified with the god Aion. Jung is the new Aion. He is the harbinger of the new Aion, what I call and what I think will in the future be called the Jungian Aion. Jung could not have perceived and summarized the content of the Aion of Pisces unless he was already outside of it. You cannot see something in its totality objectively until you are already out of it. Jung was already in the next Aion, so to speak, just as Christ was the first person to enter the Aion of Pisces. So Jung was the first to inaugurate the Aion of Aquarius. So thinking about that and working with Saturn, I really believe that the operation of the alchemical sublimatio applies, because what ends up happening with sublimatio is that you're raised out of the world and you're able to see the world and things below you. And I've talked about this a lot, and I'm talking about this a lot because I want you guys in time to understand these alchemical operations, you know. As you're able to get that good view and be able to survey things from a higher perspective, that's a vantage point. That gives you wisdom, that gives you intelligence, but it also takes you out of the world. There's a cleansing aspect to Saturn, because in order to come to the sphere of Saturn, you have to take off all of your veils, all of your clothing. This was seen with Venus as she ascended the planes, the 7 planes. She had to take off her necklaces. She had to take off everything until she was bare naked, basically. You know what I mean? But this is talking about the cleansing of the impurities of the flesh and also of the desires, as we transmute the energy as Mithras does by self-sacrificing. As we transmute these energies, transform them into better things, what we're going to end up finding is that we stand apart from individuals that we are normally with on a day-to-day basis in the world. And this can be a very, very lonely position and a very, very lonely place. And Jung was acquainted with this loneliness. A large part of it is the allure for enlightenment, the allure towards gaining wisdom, the study, the solitude that's necessary to hear the voice of the Dhyana, or the inner partner, the voice that's giving you these downloads, if you will. you know, and it's something that over time it trumps faith because because you've had the mystical experiences. You know, I've had a lot of these mystical experiences personally, and it's so much to a point where it's like there's nothing in it for me to peddle my mystical experiences to the next person, and to share these stories so that somebody can stomp and trample on the pearls that I'm throwing out. There's no reason for it. There's no clout chasing involved in it, you know. But when you have these experiences, you'll know, and you'll know that you know that you know, and then where is the need for faith when you know? There's something higher that comes from connecting to the transmutational processes that we're talking about here. So let us continue. So what Jung saw in this vision parallels to the image of Aion, right? And he was the first person to inaugurate the Aion of Aquarius. Okay, this leads us to inquire, at least briefly, what the qualities of the Aion of Aquarius might be. And it's good to talk about this because Saturn rules Aquarius. We have been talking about the Aion of Pisces until now. The term Aquarius has 3 different interpretations that I know of. It is called waterman, water carrier, and water pourrier. Aquarius is pictured as a human figure carrying a jug of water. Sometimes he is pouring water from the jug, and sometimes he is just carrying it. This suggests 3 different things. First, Aquarius is a human figure, not an animal or fish, suggesting that the Aion of Aquarius is going to be of a human nature, not less. Further, the figure is carrying water rather than being immersed in it like a fish. That suggests that the 2 Aions will have a totally different relation to the psyche. It is the difference between being a fish immersed and being a carrier and pourer. Third, we have the image of a vessel, an allusion to the symbolism of the alchemical vessel, the vas hermeticum, right? And okay, so third, we have the image of the vessel, an allusion to the symbolism of the alchemical vessel and to the capacity to contain the psyche rather than be contained by it. Instead of being a fish contained in a psychic fish pond, the individual becomes a conscious carrier and dispenser of the psyche. Both Mark and Luke recount that Christ directed 2 of his disciples to make preparations for the Last Supper. He said, "Go into the city and you will meet a man carrying a pitcher of water. Follow him." That's Mark 14:13 and Luke 22:10. This man leads the disciples to the house in which they are to go to the upper room for the Passover meal or Last Supper. This is an image of the Aion to come 2,000 years later, visible even at the opening of the Aion of Pisces. It corresponds to also to certain symbolic aspects of Christ. Christ was pictured as water bearer and water dispenser. So if it links to Christ, then in some ways it also links to Mithras. We have to think about this too. So let's continue. To the Samaritan woman at the well, he said that if she had asked him for a drink, he would have dispensed eternal living water for her. And in the Myth of Mithras, there is a scene where Mithras, and I'll put that up on the screen, where Mithras aims an arrow and shoots it at a rock and water pours forth. You see what I'm saying? So this links him once again with the imagery of Christ here. So and that is John 4:10, in which the situation with the Samaritan woman occurs. Also, there is the image of the stream of water flowing from Christ's belly when his side was pierced at the crucifixion. These images indicate that in a certain sense, Christ foreshadowed Aquarius as a water dispenser, but the water he dispensed did not generate more dispensers. It generated fishes rather than water carriers, because the church became the water carrier, the fish pond in which the faithful fish could swim. Who discovered water? We know who discovered water. Wait, who discovered water? We know who did not discover it, the fish. We can now say the person who discovered it was Aquarius. Jung discover the water, right? If my reading of the symbolism is correct, the Aeon of Aquarius will generate individual water carriers. Aquarius is ruled by the moon, some say, but also Saturn, and also Uranus, which is poignant because we can easily see the movements of the Holy Spirit via the ruler of Aquarius being associated with the Holy Spirit and the God energy, the self, right? The big S self. We see Aquarius as the messenger or conduit of the Holy Spirit from the self to the healing/enabling of mankind. That's a personal note I wrote for this here. The numinous reality of the psyche will no longer be carried by religious communities, the church, the synagogue, or mosque, but instead it will be carried by conscious individuals. This is the idea Jung puts forward in the notion of continuing incarnation, the idea that individuals are to become incarnating vessels of the Holy Spirit on an ongoing basis. He developed this idea more fully in the next work he wrote, Answer to Job, but that is another story. Okay. Okay, so we're going to get back onto the Greek word aeon. We were on that, but now we're going to get straight into just some hardcore etymology of the word, and also just to get us back, bringing us back into conscious terms on what it is that we're talking about, so that when we break into the symbols of Aion and we're talking about Zorvan and Chronos and all this other different stuff, you're not going to get lost, okay? So the Greek word aeon has many meanings and has evolved over time. In early Greek, aeon means life, whole lifetime, or generation. It can also mean one's allotment, age, or endless ages. In the New Testament, aeon is used to determine whether hell is eternal. Universalists argue that hell is not eternal, while traditionalists argue that it is. Aeon often used interchangeably with the Hebrew word olam, which means something like boundless time. Okay, so olam equals 140 in Hebrew gematria, right? And then aeon in isopsophy, which is the Greek version of gematria, equals 141. So they're very they agree. They really agree. So let's go ahead and go to the next page here. So looking at the Strong's Concordance, we see that aeon, they say here, means a space of time. So that's time that is measured in age. And then also, too, we have to keep in mind that indicates part and whole, alpha and omega, tav and aleph, because Christ was even made to say, I'm the alpha and omega, the beginning and the end, And we also know that the Hebrew language is a cipher. The 10 Sephiroth are a cipher of worlds that have been created and are being destroyed and are going to be recreated again. Same thing with the body. And this is because energy that is implicit in the idea of aeon is eternal, indestructible. So there's something to think about here. So the usage of the word aeon is as an age, a cycle of time, especially of the present age as contrasted with the future age, and of one of a series of ages stretching to infinity. Okay. So check us out. Christians, this is an example. Christians today live in the newer age, aeon of the covenant, the time period called the New Testament. It is characterized by Christ baptizing all believers in the Holy Spirit. For example, engrafting all believers into his mystical body, with all the marvelous privileges that go along with that. Galatians 3:23 through 25 speak of this word in that way, and 1 Peter 2:5 and also verse 9. Okay. And that's speaking of the age of Aquarius. Okay. A space of time and an age is another way in which this is used. This word Aion. Okay. And here's another take on Aion, basically meaning forever, an unbroken age, perpetuity of time, eternity, the world's universe, periods of time, age. Now, if we look at the 21st card of the tarot, the world, right, we're going to see a card that represents Saturn, and that represents this whole idea of Aion as well, though, too, and we have to keep in mind that it's linked to the lowest Sephiroth on the tree of life. The lowest Sephiroth that is sealed with, if we look at the Yetziratic attributions, it's sealed with the letter He. Okay? And the letter He is the letter of Aries, once again. And Malkuth is not just the illusory physical envelope, which is the body and all bodies that are around us, though, but it is also action. It's that which receives the impulse from the divine to take action. So that is something also that we really should think about, though, in this whole idea, though, is that Aion being Saturn. I mean, we think of Saturn as the seventh plane. It's something so far, so distant, and so remote that even in a lot of times in our workings, if we're into ceremonial magic or things of that nature, we don't really think of it that much. We don't really work with Saturn much, But there's a big reason to, because if you think about the place that Saturn takes up, it's almost the cap on the transmutatory vessel, on the vast hermeticum, this whole world, then this whole universe, everything around us, everything within its own universe and within its own respective sphere of power and control is being acting upon, and is being transmuted in this vessel, you see. So this is I don't want to go too far up to the left, but this is deep. I mean, it's just so deep how Aion, how it swallows all the points of the mythology that we're studying right now, and it's there at the beginning, boom, it's there at the end, at the height even of Zoroastrianism, it's there. And it's something that's very necessary for us to understand if we're going to get anywhere in transmutation, because think about the lessons that Saturn teaches. If you have any understanding of the mythology of the planets, right? Saturn teaches hard lessons, and hard lessons are lessons that give you contrast, so that when good things are going on, you can be happy and you can enjoy and you can really be at one and pulling all of your enjoyment from a situation, instead of being, a narcissistic individual because maybe dad and mom raised you up all your life and maybe you didn't have to struggle for anything, Those hard lives are what gives the hard life that Saturn represents gives maturity, and gives depth of perspective. So let's just continue. I'm just very, very amazed at this study, like how I can continue to get it, to delve into it, talk about it, and gain things from it. And I hope you're gaining something from it first and foremost, So looking at some more takes on the etymology of Aion before we continue into the rest of the lecture documentation, right? Aion is from an earlier Proto-Indo-European root. It is said that is H lower 2 and then EYU, okay, meaning vital force, life, long life, eternity. Whence also A, which is always, cognate with Latin avum, English a. Okay. And I just wrote this here on this to culminate the etymological exploration of Aion. This means that Aion is libido, psychic energy. Not only is there an equation with limitless or eternal time and vital energy here, but we see the equation of Mithras, who symbolizes libido or vital force or life, right, with Aion, Zorvan, and Kronos. In space-time mechanics of the theory of relativity of time, is intertwined with the three spatial dimensions, forming a fourfold manifold conglomerate known as space-time, and is responsible for dilations in time based upon an effect viewed by an observer's perspective, right? The results basically being weighed against others' perspective would then indeed vary on the same perceived thing in time or space. You know what I mean? The observer effect is what I was loosely talking about there. I mean, if you think about it, and I talked about that earlier here, is that time, if time was the first thing that was there, time, emptiness, darkness, and nobody to measure time. And the first thing, if you look at many pantheons, to come out of time, or the nothing, right? The light, or the first man. Man comes from a root which is men, Proto-Indo-European men, right? Where we get the word mensurability, measuring. You see what I'm saying? Mind. When all is said and done, it's mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling to think that the origins of consciousness came from something that you would think is void of anything consistent with consciousness. Nothingness, darkness, emptiness, you know? But it's that memory, I believe, that we all have of being tied to that one point in time that causes us to have the fuel to chase for things that we desire, for things that we want to connect to, you know, because we're all looking to get the greater conjunctio. You know what I mean? We're all looking for that. We're all going towards that. So, long story short, let's continue on with these etymologies. So that Proto-Indo-European root H2EY, right? Vital force, life, age, etc., day, morning, right? The vital force, life, age portion of it is speaking about libido, psychic energy, as the root or basis of time everlasting, right? Day or morning, Mithras, soul, Helios, equation, okay? And just speaking towards the idea of Shemesh, okay? Because we were talking about the sun and how that meant the sun in the last lecture. Shemesh was also used for an understanding of the idea of Saturn, okay? Shemesh actually was affixed to the understanding of the sphere of Saturn. Okay, so this is something to think about, that Saturn is also time, that Saturn is also endless time, limitless time. Okay, and that it swaps in some ways for an understanding of the libido. Okay, in astrology, in really in Crowley's system of Kabbalah, we see also too that Aquarius, which is ruled by Saturn, right, can be transposed with Aries, right? And that's where he went off on that whole thing that Zadi was the star or whatever, or Zadi wasn't the star, that it was Aries, and that Aries was the star. And I'll put something up there that could, you know, can help you to understand a little bit more of this on my rant. You know, is that Saturn, the energy of Saturn, and then the fiery solar energies of the libido are actually linked together. Okay, that they're almost one, because the Hay of Aries that's over Malkuth, that links to the idea of Saturn, is also the Hay that is over Banah, that is the mother, okay, and is the dark mother. It's a very dark principle that you're talking about there, but it's sealed with Saturn as well. So, and this is the beautiful thing about Kabbalah and understanding the tree of life, is that you can go and you can look at the tree of life, and it will help you understand some real intertwined but seemingly tangled information. It'll help you make sense of it, you know? So to the next one. Okay, so we're going to get into understanding what the word Syzygy means, okay? So Syzygy is from the late Latin syzygia, which means conjunction, from ancient Greek syzygia or syzygia, which is yoke or union. This word was recognized as English in 1847 in its astronomical meaning, okay? And in Jungian psychology, it means an archetypal pairing of contrasexual opposites, symbolizing the communication of the conscious and unconscious minds. All right. And there are other descriptions here, but I'm gonna forgo those because we have a lot of other paperwork to get into. But I put on the side here, I reference this because of the Myth of Mithras is a story of the conjunction of psychological opposites, which is seen clearly once one knows the symbols and the myth structure, you know? That something that is human is linked to something that is animal. That we have ideas of the moon and the sun being brought into conjunction on the death of Christ, and then also on the self-sacrifice of Christ and the self-sacrifice of Mithras, as well as a conjunction of both of those luminaries. So it's there, and you can see it if you understand the symbolism. You see, is what I'm saying. So we will continue forward. So Syzygia means union, junction, yoke, basically, and then a squadron of 4 chariots. This is why I wanted to talk about this, because of the word, the squadron of 4 chariots, 4 war chariots being in Syzygia, right? Abraxas and Helios are said to drive a chariot of this type of description. You know, a war chariot being pulled by 4 horses, right? Okay, so Syzygy, it links to the Proto-Indo-European root yug, Y-E-W-G. Yug also in Sanskrit deals with time, okay, and that's something to think about. Yug, Y-U-G is how they spell it there, deals with time, but it means to join, to yoke, to tie together, okay, and we're talking about the opposites here, and there's tension that occurs when you're trying to bind the opposites, trying to live with the tension of opposites, and trying to see what one will turn into the other, and then you gain something on the in between of going along with the tension of those opposites. Where that occurs is within your psyche. You know what I mean? You through going through all of those ups and downs. You see? So, Yug, Mithra Varuna was the title of whom we are dealing with in this lecture, whose magical tool or implement was the noose. Mircea Eliade spoke of the noose that it was not only for physical bondage, and Saturn is thought of as the planet of restriction, but the noose intimates magical binding through the spells of knotwork. Also, Varuna rides upon the crocodile Makara, which is linked in the Jyotish, which is Vedic astrology, to Saturn and Capricorn. Something to know, okay? And this whole thing that I'm putting up here for you on these etymologies is linked to their Saturnine and Mithraic solar deity references. They're all over these roots, okay? And these roots here refer well to post 3 through 5 of the reliefs of the stelas that we have basically been using for the Myth of Mithras, okay?